Imagine that you're sitting at home one afternoon. Your favourite show is on the telly and you're relaxing with your feet up when suddenly you hear a knock at your front door. You pause the TV, get up, walk over to the door and unlock it, opening the door just slightly to find out who it is that's calling. Then suddenly you're knocked backwards into the hallway as three masked men rush into your home, punching, kicking and shouting as they demand to know where your money is. Imagine the fear you feel as they brandish their weapons that they are willing to use to rob you of your money and leave you battling for your life. Well, David Corridon didn't need to imagine this scenario, because this is exactly what happened to him on the afternoon of February the 27th, 2012. And in this video, we're going to delve into the circumstances surrounding the torture, attempted robbery and murder of Liverpool drug dealer David Corridon. Hello and welcome to the Diary of Madmen and Monsters, where we talk about the mad men, women and monsters that inhabit our society, covering well-known and not so well-known cases across the UK and beyond. And if you're the type of person who loves true crime but can take or leave people, you're in the right place and you're going to fit in well. So let's get ready, because it's time for more true crime. David Corridon, who was 32 at the time of his death, was a well-liked and well-respected businessman in and around the Toxteth and Norris Green areas that he lived. A motocross, gym and kickboxing enthusiast, he ran a removals and house clearance company in Liverpool, and it provided him with a decent standard of living. But it was his involvement in the world of criminal enterprise that truly brought him the fortunes he had amassed. And due to the fact that he was involved in the illegal supply of Class B substances, he had managed to squirrel away the respectable sum of £40,000 from his illicit dealings, which would become the target of an odious plan later in the story. His involvement in illegal substance supply aside, by all accounts he was a nice guy who would help anyone and who loved his children and was a good father to the two of them. Corridon had been in a relationship with Maureen Smith, who was 38 years old at the time of David's murder, and they had been together for 14 years. But very recently the pair had split acrimoniously after reports that David had been unfaithful. The split, unfortunately, had been incredibly fraught, with David moving out of their shared home in Toxteth, Liverpool, and moving to his mother and stepdad's home in the Norris Green area of Liverpool. It was noted that Maureen, although angry at David's supposed infidelity, had still pined for David to come home, which was demonstrated by her action in placing an advert in the Lonely Hearts column on Valentine's Day that invited David to a rendezvous. Despite this, and despite David leaving the home, the pair still clashed over various issues, with the worst of the bust-ups coming a week before David's brutal murder, when the pair clashed in the street outside of his home. Maureen, who had heard on the grapevine that David was now in a relationship with a neighbour, had arrived screaming and shouting at David. She rammed her car into his car and had then leapt out of her driver's side door, launching a brick through David's windscreen. In retaliation, David shouted and screamed back and then grabbed a hold of her, placing his hands around Maureen's throat, throttling her for what seems to be an undisclosed amount of time. The bust-up had then come to an end, and Maureen had later sent Corridon an anger-filled message about how he had strangled and battered her, to which David replied apologising, explaining that he had simply lost it when he had seen what she had done to his car. It seems that this may just have been a turning point for Maureen, upset about David's alleged infidelity during their relationship and by the allegation that he had now begun a relationship with a neighbour, as well as being angered by the fact that he had laid his hands on her in retaliation for the damage she had done to his car. It seems this was the point at which Maureen now wanted to get revenge, and she began to formulate a devious plan. Enlisting the help of her sister Kelly Smith, she concocted a plan to exact revenge on David and make him pay for the anger and upset she felt he had caused her. With her sister Kelly's help, they contacted a friend of Kelly's who they believed would be able to help them put their evil plan into action. The friend's name was Tyrone Griffiths, aged 34. Griffiths was friends, it seems, with some unsavoury characters. The type of unsavoury characters who would be able to help Maureen Smith get the kind of revenge she was looking for. And of course, Griffiths was only too happy to help, enlisting the services of 2 career criminals and a further unidentified helper who had plenty of experience in this line of work. The Nelson brothers, or Nicholas and Willis Nelson as they were individually known, were just the type of seasoned professionals Smith would need if she wanted to get the ultimate revenge on David. The brothers were well known in Liverpool as career rogues, having built up a reputation conducting armed robberies, robbing local shops and bookies, as well as targeting drug dealers and local criminals. To say that this was a piece of cake for the pair was probably an understatement. As far as we can gather, the plan was to rob David Corridon of his money and share it between themselves. And at first, this might just have been the truth, based on the fact that the Nelson brothers had in fact organised for some of their criminal associates to burgle David's mom's home when no one was there, and to try and take the money without incident. However, when this plan had failed due to the burglar being caught by a neighbour and chased off, that plan was scrapped and another, more heinous plan was put in its place. Plan B, as we will call it, was now to enter David's home with weapons, find the money and make off £40,000 richer. During the trial, it was mentioned that part of the plan was to enter the home whilst David was at the gym. But I think it's quite easy to be suspicious of this plan, due to the fact that if the goal was to enter the home whilst no one was there, you have to ask why would they need the weapons? As the fateful day came closer, the plan was perfected between Maureen, Kelly, Griffiths and the Nelson brothers. This is apparent by the volume of messages going between the group in the lead up to the murder. Once the plan was finalised, they decided on the date of February the 27th, 2012. This was to be the day that the Nelsons, including their third man, would enter David's home to extract the cash, and Maureen would get her much sought after revenge. On the morning of the 27th of February, Maureen had discovered that a TV had been taken from her parents' caravan, and she had immediately bombarded Corridon with a number of abusive text messages. The messages blamed him for the TV's disappearance and were incredibly abusive in nature. She called him a robbing cunt via text and added, "Watch yourself." He replied, "Why? Who's coming? And how much did you pay them?" In others, she said, "I'll never forgive you for this. I will tell my baby that you are dead." And further messages said, "It's effing worth spending money to get you effed. Drop dead. Watch yourself, S-bag. I effing mean it." It was obvious to see that Smith's hate for her ex-partner was apparent. And although I couldn't find any inclination in any of the articles, papers or documents I read to clarify this, I'm left wondering, could this have been the moment Maureen made the decision to escalate the plan from a simple robbery to a planned murder of David Corridon? Mid-afternoon on the 27th of February 2012, David Corridon was at his mother's home with his business partner Craig Wallace and another person who has remained unnamed throughout the case. At approximately 4 p.m, David heard a knock at the door. So he got up from his seat, walked over to the door and opened it. On the other side of the door stood a man who asked the question, "Is Joey in?" As David stood there, perplexed by who this person could possibly be looking for, 3 men wearing balaclavas rushed towards him, barging through the door, knocking David into the passageway. Immediately, they set about him with kicks and punches, beating him into submission and cornering him. The third person, who was in David's mother's house at the time of the attack and who has remained anonymous, acted as a witness in the trial and described the sound of the attack in vivid detail. "I heard banging like footsteps and hitting the wall. The mop bucket went flying and the dog's biscuit tin, that went flying as well. They all had him in a corner. They were hitting them. There was 3 of them. One had a knife and one had a screwdriver. I could just hear them shouting. I think they stabbed him then because he was saying, "I can't breathe." They were hitting him in the face. He was trying to get out. The attack, as described by the witness, was relentless. It was a barrage of punches and kicks designed to beat David into submission and have him reveal where he had hidden his money. They had even, it seems, gone as far as stabbing Corridon in the chest and puncturing his lung, almost as soon as the beating had started. This is evident by his cries that he couldn't breathe, and the witness mentioning hearing one of the attackers saying, "If you don't do it, then I will." There was also a large amount of blood on the floor and walls downstairs before they had moved Corridon upstairs. But even in the face of such relentless punishment, David put up a fight and tried again to escape his captors, summoning up the courage to try one more time to fight back, even with his inability to breathe. However, it was fought in vain, and his attackers managed to subdue and control him once more. With the witness adding, he was then dragged upstairs by the raiders, while Craig Williams managed to escape out of the window and go and raise the alarm. The 3 robbers then demanded David tell them the whereabouts of his stash, making threats towards him as they asked. But still, David would not give up his money, deflecting their demands and refusing to break to their bullying tactics. This, it seems, would seal his fate that day, and since he wouldn't relinquish the whereabouts of the money, the 3 men decided to take his life in a callous and cold-blooded act, stabbing him again and again, another 5 times in total, piercing his other lung and creating a scenario that would make certain that David would die, suffocating from a lack of oxygen and bleeding out on the upstairs floor. Immediately after murdering David, the 3 men fled David's home and leapt into a silver BMW 1 Series that was waiting for them outside of Corridon's home, driving off at speed to escape the scene. The car in question later being found burnt out not far from the property in Norris Green. After the 3 men had left David's home, the witness mentioned that he had gone upstairs to check on David, finding him on the bedroom floor. He said he was in the bedroom, he was just lying there, and as police arrived at the scene, it was immediately evident that David had succumbed to his horrific injuries and had died where he had fell on the bedroom floor, in a puddle of his own blood. The fact that the police found the money in the house showcases not only David's unwillingness to give in to the attackers, but also the sheer futility of the act in itself. The robbers murdered a man in cold-blooded cruelty and didn't even get away with their apparent reward for doing so. After a detailed inspection of the crime scene and David's phone, approximately 3 weeks after David's murder, Maureen and Kelly Smith were arrested, followed quickly by Griffiths. Immediately upon her arrest, Maureen began to defend herself with a statement that herself and David were the best of friends, adding that they were in a relationship together for 14 years. "When we met, I had my son, who was still a baby, but David accepted him as his own and brought him up with me. I would say David and I had a good relationship and we were the best of friends. Our relationship was not violent." However, the police quickly saw through her lies and began to unravel her story, especially with the help of Griffiths' statement to police. At first, upon arrest, Griffiths made the decision to go no comment and stick to the unwritten rules of the criminal underworld. However, very quickly, Griffiths changed his tune and decided to become very forthcoming with the story of how things unfolded. Griffiths said he was approached by Kelly Smith, the sister of David Corridon's ex-partner, Maureen. He said she told him he had around £40,000 in cash hidden in his house, which were profits from and asked if he could arrange for it to be stolen while he was out. But Griffiths said that Nicholas Nelson, the man he brought in to carry out the graft, got it wrong, and he or one of his associates stabbed the dad of 2 to death. Griffiths said after Mr. Corridon was attacked, he got a call from Nelson. He said that Nicholas had said, "The kid was in the house. We left him in a bad way. Find out if he's okay." He sounded shook up, in shock. It all hit me at once that something had gone wrong. I got on the phone to Kelly and said, "They've effed this up. They've beat him up." And she started to freak out. She was kicking off, saying, "Why have you gone to the house while he was there?" Mr. Minori asked, "Is this how you intended it to happen?" He replied, "Never at all." Griffiths described seeing Kelly Smith in the hours after the attack and how she had a breakdown in front of him when she found out that David Corridon had died. He said she was distressed, she was crying, she was screaming, "Why is he dead?" He then spoke of speaking to Nicholas Nelson over the phone. He said, "At first he thought I was messing, saying whatever. I said the kid's dead." He said, "This phone's going." He was lashing it. In the days following the killing, Griffiths said he met with Nelson twice to go over what happened. He said, "Lad, it just went mad. I felt sick. I asked him who took the knife. He said he didn't see no knife. I said he hasn't stabbed himself. Who were you with?" He said, "You don't know them," like he was trying to avoid the question. It got heated. Griffiths had now implicated another member of the criminal fraternity and one of the culprits in the murder of David Corridon. When asked why he was now willing to give the police a name, Mr. Griffiths said, "Because he had been killed for nothing. I thought, I'm drawing a line. I'm telling them what happened regardless of the consequences." Upon Tyrone Griffiths' admission, Nicholas Nelson was quickly arrested alongside his brother Willis Nelson. Both were adamant they were not involved despite mounting evidence to the contrary, with Nicholas stating that he himself did not enter the property and that he was acting as the wheelman in what he thought was an attempted burglary. Unfortunately for all 5 of the suspects involved in the murder, the sheer volume of messages between them discussing the crime and the fact that phone cell location information put the Nelson brothers at the site of the murder meant that the defence was going to have a hard task in proving that they had nothing to do with David's murder. In court, the 5 stuck to their stories, with the Smith sisters and Tyrone Griffiths being that it was simply supposed to be a robbery action by Nicholas and Willis Nelson, and that the Nelsons had decided to go rogue and murder Corridon. During the trial, Maureen even mentioned that she had hopes of rekindling their relationship and didn't want Mr. Corridon seriously hurt because of this. And with the Nelson brothers' stories being that Nicholas was simply the wheelman in a supposed burglary set up by Griffiths, who he was in fear of retribution from. And Willis Nelson's defence being that he wasn't even at the scene of the crime and was in fact asleep, drunk at home, and was only told of the apparent burglary by his brother when his brother came home afterwards, woke him up and informed him that he should probably get rid of his phone because it had his brother's number in it and that the police were probably going to come looking for him soon. In January 2013, Maureen Smith, Kelly Smith, Tyrone Griffiths, Nicholas Nelson and Willis Nelson were all convicted of murder through joint enterprise and sentenced to 129 years in prison between them. They were also all convicted of the crime conspiracy to rob, with Maureen and Kelly sentenced to life with a minimum of 23 and 22 years respectively, and Nicholas Nelson, Willis Nelson and Tyrone Griffiths sentenced to life with a minimum of 28 years in prison. After the trial, there were a number of people who felt that some of the sentences given out by the judge were too harsh, especially the sentences given to the Smith sisters. What do you think? Were the sentences justified in this case? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this case, you might enjoy this next video where a Manchester man is betrayed by his ex-wife and brutally tortured to death in his own home. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time when it's once again time for more true crime.